G'day, Neil. How are you, mate?
Good. How are you?
Yeah, doing really good. Before
Like
we've
you're a
only got a
stormtrooper.
yeah. Everyone says that. It's a good prop to have sitting right there. Feels kind of appropriate speaking to you as well. But hey, before I get started, I wanted to just sort of mention that although we never really crossed paths, you and I capped off our high school years at West Van High together.
That's crazy. I saw that in the sort of form that I got sent from the Australians, and that's super interesting. So were you there in '97? Were
Yeah,
we in the same grade?
I believe so. I think I graduated in '98.
Okay, yeah, that would have been correct. That's so crazy, man. Wow, that's awesome.
I
So were
know.
you just were you just on like a sort of Canadian, I don't know, like a chunk of high school in Canada?
Just the final 2 years or year and a half, yeah.
Right. Awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's so weird. And Candace McClure is also from West Van.
Exactly. I was going to talk about her in a moment, which, given
Mhm.
that our time is a little bit limited here, I'll get straight into asking you some questions. But congrats on the film, made under exceptional circumstances. Was the idea of Demonic born out of COVID, or was the pandemic a convenient sort of excuse to bring an old story to life?
No, it was a case of the pandemic slowing everything down, and I wanted to just keep working on something fun. So, and I always wanted to do something kind of like the Blair Witch Project, like some kind of self-financed, horror movie. And so once I decided to do that, like around maybe April of 2020, I just had a bunch of different ideas for things that I was probably going to experiment with in different ways, and I just sort of put them into a blender to create a small horror film.
Right. And given like the circumstances of when you shot, was there a sense of anxiety from people involved, given the state of lockdowns and things like that?
Um, I, I don't, in general, I think people wanted something to do. Like the crew I was working with was pretty happy to be working on something. So there wasn't that much hesitation. I mean, we had all of the protocols in place and followed them, but it was still very early on. Like because the movie had 8 months or 9 months of VFX, it feels like it's way later than it actually was in terms of when it was shot. Like it was very early in the process. So things. I'm not actually sure that lockdowns had. I don't remember when the lockdowns occurred. I mean, obviously, if Canada was in an actual lockdown, we wouldn't have been able to shoot. So I don't know if that came later or before. I like my memory's so bad I can never remember. But I would say people were generally quite into the idea of having something to work on.
Yeah, right. And
Yeah.
having lived in Vancouver myself, I didn't recognize any of the locations that you shot in. Whereabouts did you the film the exteriors?
It's actually not Vancouver. It's 4 hours east of Vancouver. It's much more arid and deserty than the evergreen Pacific Northwest Vancouver look. So yeah, if you it's called the Okanagan Valley, and I don't know
Hmm.
if you went there when you were in BC, but if you drive for about 4 or 5 hours east of Van, you would hit it. It's where the American high desert crosses into Canada.
Ah, gotcha. Because it's got a really unique look to it, which I
Mm,
guess sort of helps the production sort of even more. But
mm.
fascinating. The concept itself is fascinating, and I know your work is always original and unique. But were there any influences for you making this film?
Man, the movie is just so weird in the way that it came
Yeah.
about. Like it's hard to point to anything that was a reference other than just liking the idea of what the filmmakers behind Paranormal Activity did. Like the original version of the movie was shooting in my house. It was going to be my house that it was in, right? And so it was very inspired by the roll up your sleeves kind of make it happen yourself vibe of paranormal.
Hmm.
um, but other than that, I mean, on a creative level, it's hard to point to references that I was consciously aware of, which is, it's just a weird film that way. I'm not really sure what I was doing. I was just blending stuff together.
Yeah, right. Oh,
Yeah.
that's awesome. Like that, I guess adds just to that funky sort of quirkiness of it as well. Like
Mhm.
it's and strange and innovative special effects have become part and parcel with your work. Can you explain for the layman what volumetric capture is?
Yeah, I mean, volumetric capture is basically the idea of capturing a three-dimensional virtual model of whatever it is that you're capturing. In this case, it was two actresses, but you capture a three-dimensional version of them 24 times a second that is like a CAD file. It's completely viewable from any angle, which is very different to motion capture, because motion capture, you're taking the motion from something and then you're applying it to something that could be completely different, like your stormtrooper behind you. You would apply the motion to a different object. So volumetric capture is more like locking into the look, as in wardrobe and hair and makeup, of the actor at that given second, and just three-dimensionalizing it, and you have no ability to change it later.
Right. Is this something that you've applied previously, or is this the first time?
Well, it's used in VFX in the way that usually it's just a still image. It's a still single thing. So if you wanted to capture a location in 3D, like if you wanted to capture Notre Dame as a three-dimensional object, you could use photogrammetry to make a three-dimensional object of that, an architectural model. Like all of Google Earth actually is photogrammetry if you're in the 3D mode. That's how those buildings are created. So I haven't really used it in this way. I've only used it. I mean, all filmmakers use it in VFX in the way that it's single locations or objects. The weird thing with demonic is the fact that it's moving.
Yeah. And were you really confident in applying it this way?
Well, I knew it would look exactly the way that it looks,
Yeah.
which is why you need a low budget kind of framework to be able to experiment with. Because I mean, you just have to justify it to the audience that it's kind of like glitchy in the way that the narrative is structured around it. But it's still, I love this kind of. It looks to me like lo-fi indie filmmaking, lo-fi VFX indie film, which is, I like that. I like the idea of that. And it kind of, the look sort of suits it, which is this gritty, broken, polygonal. It's just an interesting aesthetic.
Yeah, right. And moving towards the cast here, you've got a great cast in here, and as you mentioned before, Candice McClure, a West Van alumni. Do you two go back to those days, or did you sort of catch up with her later in the years?
Well, it was actually really was really interesting, because I had worked with Carly on a lot of the Oat Studio stuff that we've done online, and I just became a really big fan of hers. I knew her from Elysium, but I really got to know her during the making of some of the Oats pieces. And so this was just basically like a giant version of, well, it's actually not giant. I mean, it's smaller than some of the Oats pieces financially, but it was a 2-hour version. It was a feature version of what we were doing before. So when I was putting it together, I was like, well, which actors would be cool to do this thing with? And Carly felt like, a really great person to kind of build it around. And so I was kind of picking her brain about I had other Oats kind of alumni that I wanted to use, but for other roles, I was asking her who she thought would be really great in this kind of environment, this low budget, sort of more pressured environment. And she suggested Terry Chen, who I also had worked with on Elysium, who I love as an actor, and Candice McClure, and which was super cool, because the whole West Van thing kind of just fit neatly. So I met her again for the first time pretty much on location for the movie, and it was super cool working with her. I'm a fan of hers.
Yeah, absolutely. Sort of, just out of interest, I've been following her stuff, for years. Same with
Mhm.
yours. I mean, I've kind of known about you since 3,000 Miles to Graceland and the Rainmaker days.
Oh yeah, right. When did you leave Canada?
I left Canada in '99.
So it was at the end of high school, basically, and then
Yeah, I did a
back
little
to,
stint at the Vancouver Film School, and then like a few
okay,
courses and things, and then came back here and did film studies.
okay, cool.
Yeah,
Yeah, man, 3,000 Miles to Graceland is going way back.
yeah, I know. You did the Scorpion stuff, yeah?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that was hilarious. Trevor Kaywood and I think, I don't remember if anyone else was involved in that, but it was mostly Trev and I that were doing that.
Yeah,
the intro
right.
sequence.
Oh wow. But as for demonic, like it must have been a liberating process not to have sort of the pressures of anyone higher up coming down and enforcing their views.
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's better to have, it's potentially better to have more resources. So, yeah, I mean, it was just made in the same vein as a lot of the old stuff, which is very, very kind of just get your hands dirty and, play around. But there's something very positive to be said about working on higher budget stuff too with studios.
Yeah. Well, what in the under the circumstances, what would you say is the most challenging aspect to making the film in general?
In general,
Yeah. Like, was there one thing that over everything else was more difficult for you to overcome just because of the restraints of budget and things like that?
I mean, yeah, it's normally you would go about just showing anything that you want to show. Like the third act conflict with the Vatican guys, we couldn't afford to do. But in a way, it didn't really bother me because I like the idea of just unconventionally kind of removing that from the film. Um, but that would be an example. I mean, it was like we were seriously uh, constrained in terms of scope. So um, but there's benefits as well, I suppose, that or at least challenges uh, that make it interesting because you sort of solve problems in a different way.
Yeah, right. Awesome. Cool. Well, anyway, that's fantastic, man. I just appreciate you taking time out to chat. It's been fantastic talking about this film and just sort of, chatting with you in general. So thanks for your time.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, it's pretty awesome that we go back. So that's rad.
Cool.